Hello, we are going to be talking about chapter 2, part 3, water and how it supports life's properties. So, we have this thing called cohesion and adhesion. And the first thing, we've talked about polar, non-polar, partial charges. So, this is the tendency of the same type, the same kind of molecules sticking together. So, that would be cohesion. I always think of cohesion as like co-captains of the same. Cohesion is much stronger for water than other liquids because of hydrogen bonding, because of that not that that those polar bonds, that high electronegativity of oxygen. So most plants depend on cohesion to actually pull that water from the roots all the way up to their leaves. There's also another type of force, we could call it, called an intermolecular force called adhesion. Now, adhesion is the ability of two different types of molecules to stick together. So I really like this picture because this is the cell membrane. We'll talk a lot about the cell membrane. And then we have this protein that acts as like a tunnel through the cell membrane. And we can see both cohesion and adhesion. So the cohesion is the water molecules. If we blow this up, cohesion is that water molecules pulling the other water molecules through. I always think of it as like a barrel of monkeys where those monkeys pull each other up. So they're pulling each other, moving each other through that channel we have here. We also have some amino acids that make up this protein channel, and also have intermolecular forces, polar versus nonpolar. But we also have some hydrogen bonding going on between the water and that amino acid. So that would be cohesion, or sorry, adhesion. Cohesion is the water and water. Adhesion is the water with a different substance. In this case, it's the amino acid. Cohesion is related to surface tension, and surface tension is how difficult it is to break through that surface of the water. And so it's that surface tension that allows insects and even our plants, we can see here, to sit and float on top of the surface of the water. Right here, I would highly suggest you clicking on this link. It is with NASA, and he really goes into detail about cohesion and adhesion. And it is really kind of cool how water behaves in space. So again, if you go into the notes, you hit presentation mode, then you can click this link in and it'll take you to that video. And it's very interesting to watch. It's not that long. Because of hydrogen bonding, water has a greater ability to resist temperature change than other liquids. So if you think about it, if you've ever taken like rubbing alcohol, they do that right before a shot, before your vaccine, they're going to rub that rubbing alcohol and sterilize your arm right there. And it feels cold, but it's actually not cold. It's room temperature. Well, what's happening is we don't have that intermolecular force holding those ethanol molecules together. And so they evaporate very quickly off of your skin. They're absorbing the heat and turning from a liquid to a gas. And that absorbing, it's transferring heat from your skin to the alcohol. It gives you that sensation that the alcohol is cold. So again, heat is associated with that movement of atoms. How fast are they moving? They're moving very fast, they're going to be hot versus cold if they're moving slow. Temperature is how intense is that heat. And that's what we would do a lot of in this class is measuring temperatures of things and as they relate to processes in living organism. So heat is released when hydrogen bonds form, and it is absorbed when we break those bonds. When a substance evaporates, like I just talked about, it's going to cool that surface. The liquid remains, that surface, it cools down that surface that it's absorbing the heat. This is called evaporative cooling. And this is the whole idea or concept of sweating. As you sweat, right, you're turning that liquid into a gas. It is taking the heat from your body, it is transferring We've got a phase change between our water from liquid to gas. And so it is absorbing, it's taking that heat away from you. This is a really neat video. The guy's kind of a little obnoxious. He probably needs to cut back on the caffeine, but it's really kind of cool to watch. And again, it's a little short video on evaporative cooling and why you sweat. So like I was just talking, water can exist as a gas, a liquid, or a solid. Water is one of the few substances that when it is a solid, it is less dense. Most things pack in closer together. Most of those atoms get closer together as they cool down, become more dense. But water does the opposite. Water spreads out as it cools down to maximize the number of hydrogen bonds. And so as it does this, this is why your ice floats, because ice is less dense than water, right? So I like pictures better. So here's a better picture of this. So here we can see water. When we have water, um, and it's liquid, we usually refer to, H2O water, liquid water. We don't really call it liquid water, but it's one of the few substances that we have specific names for its phase. And so when we're talking about water, generally, we're talking about liquid. And so those molecules are moving around past each other. And so we may get some partial positives and partial positives interacting, but it's short lived because it's moving around. Hydrogen bonds are being made, broken. But as we cool down, as we take out that energy, we need to get ourselves aligned so that our partial positives are not next to our partial positives. We want our partial positives next to our partial negatives. We're going to maximize our hydrogen bonds. And this forms what's called a crystal lattice structure. And now notice I don't have nearly as many water molecules in this circle, this top circle. I keep losing my cursor as I do the bottom one. So my density goes down. And this is why ice, right? Ice is the solid, the name for the solid form of water. This is why ice floats. A solution is a liquid consisting of a uniform mixture of two or more substances. All right. So you have what's called the solvent. The solvent is the liquid that you're trying to dissolve in. So generally that is water. And then your solute is what you're trying to dissolve. So if you're trying to make, for instance, your coffee, right? Your coffee, you're taking those coffee grounds and brewing them, right? So we are brewing them into the water. The water is the solvent. The coffee would be the solute, or your sugar or cream or whatever you put in it. It was also would be your solute, which is mixing into your solvent, which is water. We refer to this where water is the solvent. We call it an aqueous solution. Water's versatility as a solvent results in its polarities. And, we'll talk about this in lab, but likes dissolve likes. Polar dissolves polar, nonpolar dissolves nonpolar. Many molecules are either polar or ionic. Ionic is like super polar. And so with that, those dissolve easily into water, forming aqueous solutions. So let's talk about table salt and water. Let's look at that. So we have salt, which is ionic, right? We have our positive sodium ions and our negative chloride ions. When you put it in water, we all know we can mix salt water, gargle with it. We do all kinds of things with salt water. Notice how the negative ion here will try to associate itself with the positive, the partial positive side of water. Over here, you will have the positive ion associate with the negative end of water. And we will continue to do this as long as we have bonding sites available. Once all the water molecules are filled with sodium or chloride ions, the solution becomes saturated. And this is where you cannot dissolve it any longer. That is a saturated solution. As we let the water evaporate out, so as our water then goes from a liquid to a gaseous state, those sodium chloride ions have to come back together, and that's when we'll be left over with our salt sitting in the bottom of our container. You see that a lot when you boil just water, right? We have a lot of dissolved solutes inside of tap water. And so when you boil that off, you see that white kind of scum on your pot, and that is those ions that were left, those minerals and that were left behind, or they were dissolved in the water that are no longer dissolved in the water. So those would be your solutes. Water also has this potential to break apart into two components, into what's called a hydrogen ion or a proton, or a hydroxide ion. Both of these are very reactive. This is where we get into our acids and bases. So a compound that releases or gives off H pluses or hydrogen ions is called an acid. A compound that accepts that H plus is a base. Generally, your OH negative loves those H positives because we put them together, we get water. So we have this scale, what's called the pH scale, based on how acidic or basic a solution is. It goes from 0 to 14. The most acidics are going to be 0. The most basic will be 14. Now, each pH unit is going to be, this is a logarithmic scale. So each unit is a 10-fold change in concentration. A buffer is a solution that minimizes this. And again, we do not want our body's pH to change. So we'll use buffers in order to prevent pH changes inside living organisms. And buffers either accept or give off. They're either acceptors or donators or protons to try to maintain the pH that you need to be at. So here is that pH scale. So here you can see that in this solution, we have by far more H pluses than OH negatives. So this would be an acid. Down here, we have the opposite. We have more OH negatives. And so that would be our base. Our neutral is 7. We have equal amounts. And again, we go up tenfold. So if we go from 7 to 6, we have 10 times more H pluses. If I go up to 5, I will have 100 times, 1,000 times, and I can keep going versus my neutral as my base unit here. So do remember, this is not a 1-for-1. This is a 10-fold change in concentration. So the book tries to tie in some real life examples using of the concepts we're learning. And one of the things we have right now is this thing called ocean acidification. Maybe you have heard of this. We talk a lot about the ocean temperature increasing, but we also have the pH decreasing, which means it's becoming more acidic. As we have fossil fuels being burned, that carbon, those carbon dioxides, there's carbon dioxide, there's sulfur, there's nitric oxides. All of those are being released into the atmosphere. When they combine with water, they form carbonic, sulfuric, and nitric acid. They come down as acid rain and then eventually end up in our oceans as part of the water cycle. And it is changing the pH of the ocean, which is a problem for many organisms. So that is it for chapter 3. So hopefully you feel confident to take your quiz. If not, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and ask me. All right, bye.